Welcome students to the second session of the chapter, the last lesson of Flamingo. In the earlier session we had read about how this chapter is about linguistic chauvinism. The background of the chapter is war, how a little boy Franz was going to school unaware of the order which had come from Berlin, stating that their mother tongue French was snatched away as the medium of instruction, and from the next year onwards they had to study in German. He was shocked and he understood why the villagers were seated on the backbenches. Now students, his turn came when M. Hamel asked him to recite the rules of participles. Now can you think of what must be his inner desire? That now I must speak those rules flawlessly without any mistake. And that was from inside that patriotic feelings were coming up. But do you think so he will be able to recite the rules of participles which he had not learned? Let us see what happens. While I was thinking of all this, we are reading para number 2, this is page number 5 here. While I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. What would I not have been given to able to say that dreadful rule of participles all through very loud and clear and without one mistake? But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there holding on my desk, my heart beating and not able to look up. What was the reason that he was feeling so bad from inside? He wanted to speak the rules of participles. He got mixed up and was feeling so bad. The teacher had every time asked him, learn the rules of participles, be careful about language. But he hardly paid any heed to the teacher. Now he was feeling so bad, he was not even able to face the teacher, and so bad from inside. Now, if any other day had been there, M. Hamel would have either scolded him or beaten him. But that day, astonishingly, M. Hamel did not scold him. Why? What is the reason? Let us see. I heard M. Hamel say to me, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have to say to ourselves, bah, I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow. And now you see where we have come out. He said, I won't scold you because you must be feeling already bad from inside. And this is the mistake with all of us. Procrastination, postponement. We say, okay, language we'll do afterwards. Till class 10 people have many subjects. According to the difficulty level, they pay attention to science, maths, then social science. But when it comes to languages in English and Hindi, we pay some attention at least to English but not at all to Hindi, thinking it's our mother tongue and it's imbibed in us. Yes, we know it, but we don't know the art of language, the beauty of that language. And there is when we make a mistake. We hardly pay attention to language. And the same thing comes when it comes to class 12. English is kept on one side, thinking it could be done afterwards. But it's not so. It has to be relation. We must be attached to our language. And then he says something. That's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now the fellows out there will have the right to say to you, how is it? You pretend to be Frenchman and yet can neither speak nor write your own language, but you are not worse, poor little Franz. We have all agreed to reproach ourselves with. He said that if the Prussians took away your language and imposed their language, they are not wrong. If we are not attached to our own language, they can easily take away our language from us. So he is saying here, we are wrong when we are not attached to our language. Many people, when it comes to mother tongue, they want to speak in mother tongue, that's very good. But if somebody asks them, okay, speak the alphabets in the correct sequence of Hindi, they will not be able to. And there is where the mistake is. We know our language, we speak our language, but we are not attached to our language, and that is the mistake. Here M. Hamel, like a very good friend, philosopher and guide, was teaching them the philosophy of life. And what was that? Never procrastinate the learning of language. And the second thing is, be attached to your language, otherwise anytime anybody would be able to snatch away your language from you. Then he said, I would reproach everybody, blame everybody. And the major thing here, such a man you must never have seen. He is ready to find out his own mistake, which very rarely people do. First of all, he blames the people of Alsace. Secondly, he blames the parents, and then he blames himself. So let us see how he blames the people of Alsace because of procrastination. Now he blames the parents. Let us see. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as to have a little more money. And I've been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? He said, people of Alsace for procrastination of language. Then the parents, because they sent the children to work on farms instead of sending them to study. And then he blamed himself because he made the children do some other things rather than paying attention to the language. So this can come as a 5-mark question here. Whom did M. Hamel reproach with and why? Now students, what happened was he started to speak about language. He was eulogizing language. Eulogizing? To say something in a grand manner. And yes, obviously he'll say because it was the last lesson. So this can be asked as a direct question. How did M. Hamel eulogize French language? Let us see. Then from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical. Is it? Maybe not for those people who don't know French, who don't know French. But for this here, French language refers to our mother tongue. It's the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical. If something is explained in our mother tongue, we understand it so quickly. People say, no, when you start speaking in your mother tongue, those feelings come out. The reason? It's your mother tongue, obviously. So he's talking about mother tongue here. Clearest, the most logical, and then a very good line over here. We must guard it amongst us and never forget it, because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. What does this mean here? We must guard our language, because when people are enslaved means supposingly they are in a prison and there is a lock outside the prison. What will act as the key to that lock? Language. Why? Because what will unite the people? Language, obviously. And the second thing, students, if you are asked not to do a thing, from inside you will be provoked to do that thing. This is human nature. So if somebody says you do not speak in your language, what will be the inner desire? No, I have to speak it. So what will unite them and what will force them to be free? Their language. That's why it would act as the key to the prison. This can be asked as a higher order thinking skills HOTS question. Why language would act as a key? Because of that, we will be forced to be free, and unity will be there because of language. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. The first part of the last lesson was grammar. Then read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. Why? Think of it. Why everything was easy? Generally when I put up this question, students say, ma'am, because friends must be listening with attention or that. But not just side of the student. Look at the side of the teacher. The teacher also must be explaining everything with much patience that day. Reason? That was the last lesson for him also. Just think of that man after 40 years of service was going away. Will he not take that last lesson to be very important for him? Yes. And that's why just see, everything was so easy. Why? I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man, again sympathy, that poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away and to put it into our heads at one stroke. So why the grammar lesson was so easy? The reason was the student was attentive, the teacher was patient. Now the next thing, there are 3 higher order thinking skills questions coming in the next one. What was that? After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. So first part grammar, second part writing. Then that day M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand, France, Alsace, France, Alsace. On the copies it was written. Okay, they looked like little flags. Little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod or at the top of our desk. You ought to have seen how everyone was set to work and how quiet it was. On their desk there was a rod, and it seemed as though this rod, because flags have to be attached to a pole, so it seemed as though from the rod there was a thread and these copies were attached and they looked like flags. Why did the copies look like flags? What was written on those copies? France, Alsace, France, Alsace. Which feelings were coming up? patriotic feelings. So the same copies assumed the shape of a flag. See, flag represents the country, and that day these copies, because of those patriotic feelings, France Alsace was written on it. They look like flags. Then this question came in the board exams also. Why did the copies assume the shape of flags? Then you ought to have seen how everyone was set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pen over the paper. We call it pin drop silence. Everybody was writing. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. Beetles came inside. But what happened? Nobody paid attention to the beetles. This is normal human gesture. If a wasp or a honeybee comes very close to us, we try to shirk away. But here what happened? The beetles came inside and nobody paid any attention. If it had been any other day, they would have taken the beetles, tied them in their fishing hooks and used them as baits. But that day nobody paid any attention to the beetles. Then on the roof, the pigeons cooed very low. And this question came in the board exams also. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German? Even the pigeons? He was wondering, these people can control us because we are human beings. Would they be able to make the pigeons also coo in German? How can you change the language, the coo of the pigeon? It's natural. They said, you can control us because we are human beings. Can you control nature also? And then he understood, yes, nature cannot be controlled at all. We can be controlled because we are human beings. Then, whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless. The teacher was feeling so bad. Don't you think so? He deserved a grand retirement ceremony. It must have been 40 years that he was there. He was feeling so bad from inside. Then, sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy, for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. Just like that. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. Students, after many years, if you visit your old school, what changes can you find? Students would be there, teachers would be there. What changes can come is in the infrastructure. The color of the walls or some new trees or some changes there, that can change. And M. Hamel was noticing, 40 years this was done. The benches became smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller. He said the walnut trees had become taller, and the hop vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all. Poor man, again this is the third time. To hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country the next day. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history. So, grammar, writing, history. And then the babies chanted their ba, baby. This is what? The alphabets of French. And here chanted means recitation. So, grammar, writing, history, recitation. Then, down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. With the little children, he was speaking. And seeing such an old man speaking with the little children, just see here what happened. You could see that he too was crying. That means everybody was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Two opposite emotions together. Laughter on seeing what? Such a big man speaking with the little children. Second, the way his voice was trembling because of emotions, and he was crying. That's why they wanted to cry. So laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus, the big clock that is there in every town. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. M. Hamel stood up, very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. Tall with what? Tall with pride that yes, I have done my duty well. I did my duty well for 40 years. I accomplished it towards the end also very well because he guided everybody. Then, My friends, said he, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France! Vive la France! Long live France! Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed. You may go. This was the end of the last lesson, how he ended the last lesson. He had no words to speak. He was choked with emotions, and that's why he wrote on the board, Vive la France, long live France, and then he ended the last lesson. So the questions that we have done today are, what happened when France was asked to recite the rules of participles? Second, why did M. Hamel not scold France when he could not recite the rules of participles? Third, whom did M. Hamel reproach with and why? How did M. Hamel eulogize French language, saying it's the most beautiful language in the world? Then, why the grammar lesson was so easy that day? The reason, both the student and the teacher, patience and attention. Then, why were the copies compared to flags? Why France wondered that they would make the pigeons sing in German? What was M. Hamel doing when the students were writing? And then, why did the children want to laugh and cry together? And the last question is, how did he end the last lesson? So this chapter is all about the last lesson given to you as the first chapter, so that we also be attached to our language and never procrastinate the learning of language. English is a part of curriculum, plus something which has to be relished and enjoyed. And for that, it should never be postponed. It should be done along with the other subjects. This is the message of the chapter, the last lesson. Never procrastinate the learning of language. Thank you.